How are Iranians managing this war? Are they going to succeed as they promised? Or are they going to fail as US and Israel promised? To understand how they might be doing in this war, we need to look into a couple of similar situations that they dealt before. Let's start with the very basics. The revolution, when the founder of the revolution, Khomeini, when and before he came to power, he promised that he was going to pay the people in cash from the proceeds of the oil sales. He said the Shah was wasting that money on his personal life and corruption. He was going to give that money to people. That didn't happen. He said the oil for people was going to be free. Oil in Iran is really, really expensive, such that a lot of them cannot afford to even put gas in their cars. And that was a cause for one of the major and deadly uprising against the Iranian government a couple of years ago. So total failure in what they thought and what they promised. And then almost 30 years ago, the Khamenei, the supreme leader that got killed recently, he promised the year 1400. 1400, their year is different. So in Iran, I think right now is 1404. So 30 years ago, he promised the year 1400, in which Iran was going to be one of the most advanced, industrial, wealthy countries in the world, and an example for the whole world to follow. How did that work out? Not good. They not only didn't become an industrial country, they not only didn't become a big economy, they not only did not set an example, the total opposite happened. Total failure. They had this war with Iraq at the beginning of the revolution, a war Saddam, they say Saddam started, the Saddam Hussein of Iraq. And then after a year or two, Saddam was ready to sign a ceasefire and peace agreement with them, but the Iranian leaders insisted to fight on because they promised, they were so sure that they were going to win the war and they're going to capture Iraq, and from Iraq go to Israel and capture Israel. They drag on that war for 8 years. After 8 years, they realized that they are losing thousands of people every year, and they're going to lose the war to Saddam Hussein. And then they accepted the ceasefire. Total failure. And then the war in Syria. The Arab Spring reached Syria. The protests were completely peaceful, and they wanted the regime change. But the regime fired on the protesters, and there was a civil war. Civil war broke out, and then after a couple years, Iranians stepped in to save that regime. They came in with their IRGC, and they brought in thousands of Shia fighters from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, from all over the world. Thousands of Shiites they brought in with the IRGC, and Hezbollah of Lebanon and Shias of Iraq. They all came in, but under the command of Iranian IRGC, to fight and save that regime. Thousands of Syrians got killed in that war, and millions displaced. And after 10 years, within a year or two, Syrian opposition marched to Damascus and toppled that regime. So Iranian regime's plan failed totally, total failure. Another plan Iranian regime government had was, they called it the depth of strategy, their depth of strategy reached to Israel and all of the region. How? With proxy groups. They formed these Shia proxy groups in the Middle East, and they call them the depth of their strategy, which the idea behind it was that they said they're going to form these so-called axis of resistance, so they can fight through them. They can fight or keep their enemy busy away from Iranian borders, because they said if we don't fight the enemy away from the borders, we have to fight them on our borders. They were so sure that these groups are going to deter the enemy, keep the enemy busy, bleed their resources, so they cannot afford to come to Iranian border to fight them. And for so many observers, that was working. They thought, oh, Iran has established these proxy groups across the region. That is working. But it did not. It did not work. Especially 2 years ago with those pagers that almost collapsed Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then Hamas in Gaza, and then the fall of the Assad regime, through which Iran had direct access to Lebanon and to Palestinians to arm and support them. And then the withdrawal of America from Afghanistan. Believe it or not, Iran was fighting America in Afghanistan through insurgency groups when US was there. But when Taliban came, Iran lost access to Afghanistan. And then removal of Soleimani, and then US and Israel operations and policies in Iraq restrained Iraqi militia groups. And then Houthis. Saudis were fighting Houthis for over 10 years. They couldn't even scratch the surface of causing any damage to Houthis. But last year, US operations against Houthis degraded their capability tremendously. So they became incapable of doing anything significant. And so Iranians plan of these groups, and by the way, they spent trillions of dollars to create these groups and arm them and train them and put them on payroll. And as a result of these groups, the sanctions that were imposed on war, if you add them all together, the cost for Iran was trillions of dollars. So that also failed. And then total failure. So in several very major fronts that Iranians invested decades and trillions of dollars for the regime's survival, all of them failed one by one. So if they failed in everything that they have done so far, why would you think that they're going to not fail this time? And this war, if the United States is able to sustain the pain and cost of this war, if US and Israel can sustain this war, Iranians are going to fail. But if anybody rushes to to reach to a ceasefire or peace with Iranian government because of the pressure that is coming from economic and security crisis they have created in Strait of Hormuz. If anybody because of that rushes to a agreement with Iran, that will have insane amount of danger and risk in long and short term for US. So if US can maintain the pain and cost of this war for a few more months, Iranians are going to either collapse or beg for a ceasefire on US terms. So Iranian records show only failure. Their past experience is all failure. And this time will not be any different.